Cleaning Simon's feeding pump after a tube feeding has been administered. You can tell that Simon's feeding is complete if the bag is nearly empty, and it all depends on how much food he ate orally and how much the dose was. A full dose for him is 300 mLs, and you will notice a variation. Some days after a full feeding, there will be about this much left. Sometimes it'll be completely empty, and that's just because these formulas vary a lot, so don't worry about that. You didn't do anything wrong. When we clean Simon's feeding pump bag, not backpack, I call the backpack the backpack and the bag the bag. So when I clean Simon's feeding bag, I use cold water and I give it just a little shake, couple rinses. You know, that one is probably fine. It really isn't that big of a deal if it's not perfectly clean. We're just trying to prevent clogs from happening, and you know, also so he doesn't end up with older formula from earlier in the day. So I opened the clamp and I put water in the bag. Now it's full of water, and all we're gonna do is basically the exact same thing as we did when we were feeding him. We're gonna check the rate is 350, the dose is 300, that's just fine. And we're going to clear out the volume total. The volume total means the amount that was just administered to him. So in order to get the pump to work, you always have to clear out the volume total when you want to do things like clean or feed him. After we do that and there's water in there, all you got to do is just click run pause. At home, I typically just leave it sitting on the sink here. You know, just figure out a way so it doesn't matter if it falls in. So the sink should be clean. It doesn't need to be like bleach, sanitized, that kind of clean, just as long as there's nothing like raw meat, you know, vomit, feces, stuff like that obviously would not be good. But if it's just, you know, a hand washing sink, don't worry about it being like, you know, we do the same thing at home. We wash our hands. We don't sanitize the sink every single time his feeding pump is in here and touches it. It's really not that big of a deal. It does not need to be sterile. It's just fine. I just kind of position the end of it so that it's kind of floating in the air instead of like sitting in the sink itself. And, you know, you can always kind of drape it so it's hanging like that. You know, there's many ways to drape it so that it's not sitting directly in the sink. So that's all you need to do to clean it. I typically just turn it on and walk away, do some other stuff. It'll take maybe 2 minutes max is the shortest amount of time it needs, but you can totally leave it to clean for 10 minutes. That's fine too. It doesn't matter. After all of the tubing is clear, and for time's sake, I'm just going to stop it now. I'll just turn it off when it's completely clean. I clamp it. If you don't clamp it, it will leak all over the fridge. You have to also make sure that the med port is still shut, and I'll typically just give that a little rinse. The other thing that's really, really important when you're storing the pump bag is that, and you know, like I just dropped the head of the tubing on the floor. It's really not the end of the world if that happens. Like, I try to avoid it, but it's fine. So I just sort of loosely coil things around, because what this does is when it's stored in the fridge and it's getting cold, if you store it in a way that's going to cause a kink, it's going to be really hard to tube him the next time, and you'll get a bunch of error messages next time. So that's why I kind of just wrap it all around. I can do that again. Starting like this, I take this doodly bob and I just hold it with my hand, and then I take the remainder of the tubing and I very gently and loosely wrap it around the bag, wrapping it around the back of that doodly bob, and that's about all. So you can store it in the fridge like this. You're welcome to throw it in a plastic bag if it's easier. It's very important not to put this pump in the refrigerator. This goes in the fridge, this does not, because you will ruin the battery on this fridge. It's the exact same thing as your car battery not working in the winter. Batteries don't like cold, so please don't forget that. And also when you're cleaning it, don't worry. You see, I got some water on here. You know, you don't want to like be drenching this thing in water, but it is water resistant, so don't be too worried about splashing it a bit, or even if, you know, I just try to keep the water away from where the power supply goes. If you do spill a bunch of formula all over this pump, it's totally fine to give it a rinse like that and then store it so that the charger goes in there, so we want to store it this way. You don't want to store it this way and then water's going to pool in there. Just store it that way if you need to rinse it off, if you ever spill anything on it, and that's just fine.